Hello, in this video we are going to talk about what on earth are objects. Let's get to it. Pardon the interruption, I do have a big announcement before we continue on with the video content. And I want to say that I do have a new Instagram account. It is HD Coding, and this is where I will now be posting in all of my latest updates, as well as maybe some memes and other content that is having to do with my channel. And you can see multiple posts that I have here, as well as upcoming new videos and content that will be posted. And this is where I will be posting in future content from now going forward, and I'll slowly transition to be using this sole account. So if you haven't already, go ahead and follow this handler right here, and I'll probably follow back, and you can be up to date of what I'm doing within the YouTube realm. The other announcement that I want to have announced is that I did create a website for everyone to take a look at the latest videos, and I put them from the most up to date on the very top for you to take a look at. And this will take you to the individual YouTube itself, and you can watch those cases when you need. And I am going to build out and update the site as we go, and this will have different sections. For now, we're just talking about coding concepts, but later on there'll probably be a tutorial section, a podcast section, things like that. So this site will grow as the channel grows, and all of the content will be posted also on this particular site. So that is all of the announcements I have for now, and let's go ahead and continue on with the video. Now, one of the terms that get thrown around a lot is the term objects. And objects is a very hard to grasp at first, just because it has so many different meanings and contexts. And depending on what you mean or what context you're in, object, the definition of it or what you're referring to does change. And that is why object is one of the most confusing things inside of computer science and programming, but it actually is pretty easier than you think. And when we are talking about objects, essentially when we are referring to an object, we are referring into technically a noun, right? A person, place, or thing by the context. And typically in the coding realm, we either mean an object as a physical, literal object, like a person, place, or thing, or we're talking about something within the programming language itself, or different types of data types, things like that. And it's one of the core fundamentals within programming itself. So you can't talk about objects unless you talk about object-oriented programming, or OPP for short. And a lot of things, especially programming language, are centered around this concept, this type of way that you do program is object-oriented programming. And what it is essentially is that you are treating everything as an object, and you are basing your logic off of objects like so. And there are a lot of languages that are object-oriented programming, such as JavaScript, Java, Ruby, etc. And this is a very popular ideology that is used through the programming realm, is object-oriented programming. And this all revolves around the idea of objects. Now let's go ahead and talk about what exactly do we mean by objects. And again, they do change depending on context. But in most cases, we are talking about nouns, right? We're talking about some sort of person, place, or thing. And that could be best represented by either a hash or a class. And when we are talking about objects, we usually mean a physical object, and the best thing to represent them are a hash or a class. We may be talking about certain data points, certain data that we store, they are technically called objects, like a item within your cart, that's technically an object within your cart, things like that. And other times, objects may refer to something that is part of the programming language, such as data types or programming methods, functions, and anything else having to do with the fundamentals of programming. And the other thing is that objects could also refer to the context of what you are programming. Such as if you're programming in a mobile application, an object might be the touchscreen phone or the buttons on the side. Well, versus if you are doing something in the web development field, an object could be the URL object or the window of Chrome object, things like that. Those are also considered objects. So let's go ahead and get into some examples. Now, in most cases, when you are working with objects, it is best represented with hash. So when most people are saying object, they technically do mean a hash of a particular person, place, or thing. And here are some examples. And again, hashes are just key value pairs. And here we have a person object. And a person object has a name, email, and phone. And for this particular person, their name is Bob with the email of bob@email.com, and that is their phone number. And that is a whole object there. It's a person object. And another example here right below is the car object. A car has a runs, a boolean, has the number of seats, and it has the color. And all of those cases, they are all considered objects. This is the person object, and then this is a car object. So you can technically represent objects with key value pairs with hashes. Now, the other common thing of how you represent objects is using a class. And essentially, a class is a blueprint of objects. It's whatever you have within the objects and what you are able to perform with the objects. Such as if you have an animal object, animal has a name, age, and color, and a method that they probably use is they probably eat. A much more realistic example is, let's say that we are building a bank account. And with the bank account, it has a class of account, which is a blueprint of what all accounts should have. All accounts should have some sort of a number, like a account number, and if a boolean for active, if the account is active or not, and the running balance, which should be either a float or an integer. So that might be a realistic approach of how you would do a account object with a class. And something that you can do within the class is you can manipulate the balance by doing a deposit. With the deposit method, you can use that method within the class to change the balance to have it increment with whatever amount that you are depositing. And this is how you would represent objects with classes. Now, in most languages, every single data type you can think of, such as strings, number, booleans, float, integers, arrays, hashes, classes, etc., they all are considered objects because they're objects of the particular programming language. And in some cases, you may have to be more specific, or when you are using the term object with these data types, you have to be more specific of which one you are talking about. And in some cases, they might be variables that are representing one of the data types, and that could represent a specific object as well. So when we are referring to objects within data types, you have to really pay attention of what it is trying to kind of describe when you are referring to them as objects. And lastly, when we are talking about objects is the programming context. Not every single programming language are going to be the same type of context, because when we are working as a web developer, we may be developing inside of a Windows object. But if you are developing in a mobile application, that might be a different type of object. That might be a touchscreen object. Things like that. That is how it could change depending on the programs. And the browser, elements on the page, things that are having to do or what you're trying to achieve, those are all technically are objects. For example, within this presentation, I have a few objects of my own, such as an image object, as well as a title object, some slide objects. Those are all considered objects. This because it's part of the program itself, they are also considered objects. So when we are talking about objects, just pay attention of what context it is, because it does change context from here and there. Just know that objects represent a person, place, or thing. And usually you need to pay attention with the context of what we are referring to. But in most cases, we are talking about one of these things, is a data hash class or data type or something within the program itself. Those are considered objects, or what we are calling that term is an object. But most likely we won't be very ambiguous. We won't call it object as useful as calling it like this or that. We would most likely be calling it like a person's object or a car's object or account object. There's usually something that goes in front of the word object, so you know what kind of object it is. And that will kind of pinpoint you of what to expect of what you think the context of the object is. And it really is everywhere. Object-oriented programming is almost in every single language out there, and not knowing what object is will give you a huge disadvantage because it is everywhere within the programming field with using object-oriented programming. And this is one of the things that you technically do that you're not even noticing. Like, you're always using variables, methods, you're manipulating objects within the DOM, things like that. So when we are talking about objects, just pay attention to the context, and that is what on earth are objects. Without further ado, if you have any questions, leave them down below and I will get to them as soon as I can, and I'll see you in the next video. See ya.